All right, folks, we're back with one of my favorite series. That's right, we got another installment of the Discoglog today, the show where we listen to, I listen to a band's or artist's albums, and I rank all of them against each other to see how they all stack up. Today we're going to be focusing on Big Wreck. That's right, we're going to be focusing on that talented Canadian rock outfit that started back in the 90s. And they are still currently active, having just released an album within the last few months. So get ready, everybody. This is going to be a great one with one of the most underrated bands out there. So let's get into it. Alright, so the first one we've got is, of course, In Loving Memory of, released back in 1997 with Chris Wardman and the band producing. As you know, the band was started by Berklee classmates Ian Thornley and Brian Doherty when they were at Berklee College of Music in Boston. They formed it with Dave Henning on bass and Forrest Williams on drums. And it starts with some big guitar sounds in here with some pretty good riffs. Some good stuff in there. Decent drum sounds, but they are a little bit not punchy. They need to have a little more oomph in them, I think. The bass is pretty solid here, and it's not just playing the follow the guitar kind of stuff. We've got some interesting things happening here. Ian's voice is pretty good out of the gate here. There's still a lot missing from his technique. Like, he's not super good at belting here yet. He hasn't developed a large range that he will have later. There's not a lot of distorted rock singing on this record. Other than that, the technique he is using is pretty good. The vocals are a little too far back in the mix. I'm not a huge fan of how they mix that. They seem less powerful. There's some decent vocal melodies, but there are some repeated kind of cliches in multiple songs that aren't great. This album has a pretty strong southern rock and blues sound with a tiny bit of progressive stuff mixed in there because they do like to play with rhythms a little bit. The lyrics are pretty good for a 26-year-old like Ian is at this time. But that being said, the whole album is kind of a relationship album. It's all about relationships. And I mean like the boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, you know. And it's got all the different things with that, like, you know, not being able to see the problems in the relationship, having nostalgia for it, but trying to avoid the bad memories of it. You've got liars in there, people confronted with their failures in the relationship, maybe some cheating happening, being used by the other person in the relationship while they're already, you know, getting with somebody else. So, you know, all that kind of stuff in here. It's basically just the overarching theme of the kind of the ways that a relationship can be destroyed. I don't know what kind of place he was in at the time that they wrote this. It's a little bit one note of a record, both in the style and in the lyrical themes. So that's kind of a negative on it. As a first effort, though, it's pretty good. And I hope you guys like my little puns here based on the different songs. Some of them are just straight up song titles from the album's career. So with that being said, I think I can't really see here, but this is going to go, I think, so we'll put it here in the undersold category, which is actually a song on the next record we're going to talk about. But yeah, I felt this is a fairly good effort of a first album, but when you compare it to the rest of their career in terms of how this record sounds, the things they're doing on it, it's really not that impressive, even with the well-charting singles. I just don't find it to be that impressive of a record. Anyway, that brings us to the next one, The Pleasure and the Greed. All right, Pleasure and the Greed, released in 2001 with Dave Jordan producing. Very famous rock producer there that makes some really good sounding stuff. Produced the first two Alice in Chains records, if that tells you anything. Anyway, we got some really big guitar sounds thanks to Dave Jordan's production, of course. We've got some riffs that are even a bit more creative than the last record. Actually, kind of a lot more. The drum sound, way better. I'm not sure I like how they mix the bass. It feels like it's kind of hard to hear it sometimes, but it's still good bass. Obviously, the big change here is Ian's vocal development is light years ahead of the first record, because now he's using way more range, like a ridiculous vocal range, actually. And he's using a lot more distorted rock style vocals. So he has strongly improved his technique. The vocals feel a little bit less wild. It seems like he's being a little more conscious about how he's singing things and what he's doing. So that's really great. The lyrics have gotten a little bit more clever, and we've got a lot more variety of lyrical ideas and themes on this record, which is very good. The vocal mix is very in your face. And the entire mix obviously is way better just because they've upgraded personnel on the back end with production and mixing, you know. It's longer than the previous one, but it doesn't feel that long because the songs are not super long or anything, so that keeps that from being a problem. It's gotten away from the style of the first record a little bit, and they've incorporated a much wider variety of sounds. It's much closer to, you know, how they sound now, and they've really dialed in that sound pretty nicely here, because now we've got more hard rock stuff. We got some jazz elements, we got blues, we got prog, and even a little bit of some country ideas getting thrown in there every so often. So it's a very unique record, and there are less themes about relationship issues here, and it's kind of more generalized about people in a way. But there's a lot more going on thematically here, which is great. Like escaping from a fake world, being underestimated and writing off the people that do that to you, being obsessed with someone and being unable to get out of the relationship, even when you should. Pretending everything is fine, even when the person is doing crazy things like cheating. There's some references, I feel like, to mental health issues in one of the songs, but I'm not positive. Someone realizing they've made a mistake by getting in a relationship with someone, or how they're treating the relationship. There's stuff about letting go, issues with anger. I really like kind of the theme of the last song, Defined by What We Steal, because it's basically saying that's kind of what it says, but the extra part is it's defined by that instead of what we're given, which is what we're told by fate, that it's a gift. But really we have to go and take everything ourselves that makes us anything. And with all that being said, just because they've dialed up their sound here and really figured things out, we're going to drop this in the top tier here. So that album, instead of that song, that's the pun. So that's going to go in the top one just because of the reasons we mentioned, and also the fact of it's an incredibly memorable record that sounds really good. And I think it's one of the best records of its decade, and I don't know why it was not significantly more popular. All right, Albatross is the next one. Albatross is their first album after reuniting after their hiatus. If you know, in the early 2000s, after the second record, they kind of broke up, and Ian went and did his own thing with his own band of his own original music that he'd written himself, and did a couple of albums in between here. And then in 2012, 2011, Albatross came out after they had gotten back to, he and Brian Doherty had gotten back together. They added Dave McMillan on bass and Christopher Henry on drums. There's a lot more varied guitar sounds and experimentation. We're incorporating a lot more clean sounds, some fuzz tones that were not present in the previous record. And there's a wider variety of instrument sounds. Ian's voice has more control, especially with distortion. Before, the distortion felt like he just kind of came upon it by pushing, which is a fine approach, you know, but it does lend itself to a little bit of a lack of control. Not that that was super evident on the previous record, just because that record was very expressive vocally. But he's much better at that this time, still pushing his range further, and there's a bigger focus on vocal layering and harmonies that was not there before. There are more lead guitars, which is always great with as good of a player as Ian is. The drum sounds are more specific to each song instead of having kind of the same sound mixed together, although sometimes they're a bit hard to hear. Creative bass parts, and they're at a good spot in the mix. And there's really great use of effect on Ian's voice. Their vocals are very well recorded. I mean, there's still clear hard rock sound and all their previous styles, but this has a little bit more pop sensibility to it, just in the way that the choruses and things are being structured. It's a little bit catchier. I don't really want to say that because the last record was full of hooks everywhere, even if they weren't super particular about those hooks. There were hooks there. This one they're being a little bit more conscious, I think, of how they come up with hooks. It's a pretty good comeback record. This has some more relationship themes on it, as the previous two have had. This is a pretty constant thing with the band. It's a pretty big source of Ian's songwriting. So that's here, but there are other things that are interesting to think about here. Stuff about being better off alone. Things, trying to keep a relationship together even though it's difficult and it's a mess. And then we kind of get away from that a little bit, of taking advantage of each other's emotions. Having a lot of hardships and not being successful, but surviving, still being able to survive. Fragility of relationships, and when it falls apart, anything is fair game because we're not good people and you started it first. And then we get a little bit more esoteric again, things sounding like him saying we're not in control and somebody else is controlling us. Stuff about greed, envy, more relationship stuff, things about wasting time being fleeting. So yeah, it's got some more general things about time and lack of control, and so it's getting a little bit more philosophical with things, and it still has the relationship themes like it always has. Kind of want him to move on from that, but anyway, this is well executed. Sounds like a good record. By the way, I forgot to mention the producer on this is Nick Reskalinix, who is a pretty good producer, has worked with some massive bands in addition to Big Wreck. So, bottom line, this record is a good sounding record. Sounds great. Good comeback record. It's not quite as memorable as Greed is. So, because of everything we talked about and that being the case, and it just not feeling quite as interesting of a record, it's going to go right below it in the, what did I call it? In the second tier, the High on the Hog tier. Now that we're done with that, we're going to go to Ghosts. All right. Ghosts is the fourth big record released in 2014 with Nick Reskalinix once again. And it still has that leveled up production that Nick brought to the band. This record is very clearly more dark and very specifically rock oriented than the previous two records have been. There is some amount of funkiness, though, in how they've constructed the riffs and different rhythms and things. It's got some spacier vocals that fit this newer direction in using more harmonies like that, still incorporating more leads. It has some really good bass ideas on it from Dave. It has good drum sound, just good. The focus on the vocals, it's cool that it has a stronger focus on vocals. It also has some interesting percussion elements, things like that. Although my main gripe with this, which is always a big gripe with things when it does come up, is that there's a lot of long songs on it, and I am not a fan of that. A long album I can deal with if the songs keep my attention and aren't super long. But if it's got multiple long songs on it, it starts to drag a little bit and gets a little boring. I'm just not a huge fan of that. This one gets way more philosophical, though, than the previous records. We're kind of getting away from that relationship stuff all the time in the themes. So this is a better approach from that. And some of these were difficult to interpret, or they have a meaning that's kind of wordy to extrude, or they have a meaning that's kind of complicated that takes a lot to describe. Like the first song being what I've written, so focused on moving up, we forget about others, and we don't have any home to go to. Stuff like, even though I'm imperfect, I'm your one, so there is a relationship in here. But he digresses because she's not interested anymore in him, or she's interested in somebody else for the wrong reasons. Letting go of the past to get to a better place is being haunted by your decisions and telling another person they're better off without the subject. Somebody not thinking about their consequences and somewhat dumping them and moving on, but still having difficulties moving on from them. Mistakes and burn bridges, and I've heard that this particular song kind of seems to indicate somebody slept with their friend's significant other. Spicy stuff, not sure though. Thinking moving up will get us somewhere, but someone else above us is in control. Taking the pitfalls of a relationship, I believe, even though they're going to happen again. And I've given too much, probably. Running so far from your reality, you can't get back to where you need to be. Letting go of control to save yourself from destruction. Kind of talking about the dynamic of everyone around around you, like your friends, being fine and cool, but you being at war with the person you're with, essentially. I wrote that it had a nice theming and a through line. This album's kind of all about regrets and bad decisions and being haunted by things, hence the title. So that's kind of the through line with it. Okay, let's talk about where we're ranking this. Long songs makes it less memorable, even though the theming is a little bit more grown up and I like it better. So it's a little boring, it's a little slow. There are some good songs on it, though, that kind of lift it up a little bit. Not a huge fan, really, of this period of the band, I have to say. So for my personal opinion, that's going to be right in the middle there. It's a good sounding album. There's good stuff happening on it. I just wish, some stuff had been shortened and cut down. There's just too many long songs, and it's not as interesting or groundbreaking as the previous record, so, that kind of holds it back a little bit. Okay, let's get to Gray Street now. That one took way too long. Really digging in now. It was supposed to be you and I till the end of... So Gray Street here, released 2017 with a different producer, Garth Richardson. It does a lot more of experimental stuff here. It sounds a lot softer. There's a lot less edge than the previous records have in song. Incorporates more folk and pop stuff. I'm not sure about the recording approach because it just doesn't feel interesting, It's kind of hard to explain. And if you listen to it compared to the other records, you understand what I'm trying to say here. So it's a little bit esoteric, but you'll get what I mean. There's unique sounds and percussion elements, interesting drum parts here. Because at this point, they have a different drummer, I believe. Chuck Keeping, by this point, was the drummer. But there's a weird balance between the instruments and the vocals that doesn't feel quite right. And I'm not super into that. It's just less energy. I didn't take a lot of notes on this record because there was nothing going on for me. I was just really bored. It focuses very specifically on Ian Thornley's recent divorce. And I call it the divorce album because that's what it is. It's the divorce album. And it sounds like a divorce album because it's got less energy, it is boring, and it's sad. And I'm just, sitting here wanting from it. So anyway, obviously the themes are going to be about different things that happen in the divorce. It's kind of about getting, it's kind of the whole process of him getting divorced, not being surprised and being shocked that they didn't work out, even though it was pretty obvious they wouldn't, according to him. He gave so much and hurt and tried to take what was possibly left for himself and preserve it, not letting that hurt drag you down. It's kind of the whole stage of it, trying to be over it and trying to repair the damage or whatever, but then, it doesn't work out. Clearly, you need to move on, and it hurts a lot, and it drags you down for a bit, and then you get into the tit for tat, the mess of the back and forth between the different aspects of the legal process of getting a divorce and all that, trying to justify what happened or rationalize what happened to yourself, being in denial in it and then being in despair of it, and then finally realizing what happened, what the relationship did to you, and being able to let go of it. So that's kind of the whole thing of the record. The divorce album, not a whole lot to say about it because I found it quite boring and uninteresting. And my debate here was the first record going to go in the bottom tier, or was Gray Street going to go in the bottom? And Gray Street is going to go at the bottom. Unfortunately, this is just an incredibly boring record to me. I got to stick it in the bottom because it was the one I enjoyed the least. And a note on the tiers, this is not a generalized thing to say that this is a terrible record or something. These tiers are done within the body of work of the artist, which means it's anything at the bottom is just the most lackluster thing that they did in their career. It does not mean it's a bad record. It's still a good record. It's just not a great big record comparatively. So that's where we are. All right, next one, But For the Sun. All right, But For the Sun here, 2019, with producer Eric Ratz, the first to be recorded as a trio without Brian Doherty, who had been diagnosed with lung cancer prior and was not able to record with the band, and subsequently did die before the album's release, and it was dedicated to him. And there's a song on here that is directly about him, and it's deeply sad and almost made me cry. But anyway, let's get into the rest of it. It's still solid stuff, even though he's not around. Ian's able to pull the weight of the guitar writing pretty well. Turns to the band's progressive and blues roots that they had before, with the big guitar sounds and the low tunings, all the stuff that we really like. Very creative guitar parts once again. And Dave and Chuck do a very good job in the rhythm section. The things here, really cool stuff. Interesting drum parts on this, really cool. Still uses some of the experimental ideas from the last two, but it's not overdoing it, and it's blending it within the context of the songs much better, so we don't end up with things that are too boring because they tried to get too experimental with it. Ian's got some very creative and pure and powerful vocals, very dynamic ideas happening, going through different parts of his range, using his distortion in different ways. Really cool stuff, really impressive for his age. That'll come up again later. It's just a good overall blend of the new style that they had with Ghosts and Gray Street and the old style with Greed. So it's kind of that perfect mashup of these two ideas. And they're no longer separated from each other, and they're blended together here. The themes of this record are way different. The relationship stuff is kind of really not a big thing on this record. There's not too much of it on here. There's a couple of songs about that, but most of it is not about that. It's about getting to the other side of tough times, and life will keep moving forward, so you need to be able to forge on. Stop rehashing the past so you can clear your head and get on with your life. talking about the world hurting someone and them being frozen and unable to know what to do instead of trying to help themselves. His days and his grind and the daily pressure follows him home. Although there's a juxtaposition with that where he says, I'm feeling up, I should be down. So I don't know what is going on with that. But the overarching theme is the daily grind following you home. Screwing up your life and blindly trying to run away from it. People telling us to behave, society telling us to behave, but still trying to believe in another way to do things without conforming, about trying not to overthink things, being in grief and needing someone to pull you out. Life wasn't complete until the person in their life knocks you down, but you get another chance every time if you man enough to take it, basically. Idea of your life being derailed by a simple problem and being able to rise back up from that. The song that I said is that grief is hitting me and I need someone to pull me out is the song that's directly, I believe, about Brian and his death. And I imagine that was very difficult. That song is pretty sad. It's called Help Is on the Way. Anyway, let's get into our summary here. But For the Sun, like I said, is a great blend of their current and old style here. It's a very interesting, dynamic record. It's got the great big guitars that we love. Ian's voice is awesome on this record. Everything about this record is pretty dang good. From the theming to the sounds to the everything. So it's going to go back in the top tier here. Very great record. Let's keep it going here to 7. All right, 7, they said was intended to be a full album. They just decided to release it as 3 EPs. And subsequently did eventually release it as a compilation of the 3 EPs on vinyl. So produced once again by Eric Ratz here. It's going in a similar direction as Sun, but uses a lot more genre blending and a lot more unique instrumentation and different kind of rhythmic ideas with the guitars. It has a very wide style range that has a lot more pop and jazz and indie rock ideas in it. We've got chorus leads, which is something they had never done before. So that basically means playing a lead twice and generally harmonizing it. So, playing notes that harmonize with the main lead, that kind of thing, And of course, they got Sekou Lumumba as the drummer here, who was formerly the drummer for his Thornley project, but is now in the main band Big Wreck here, and he is a big upgrade to the drumming they had before. No shade to the other guys in it, but Sekou's just really good, and he brings a lot more unique patterns and rhythms to the drum sounds. Very creative riff styles and writing, because they've got a lot more different ideas of how to construct a riff and how to play it on these songs, and it makes them really interesting and unique. It feels like, they've taken a more experimental approach to the same kind of thing they were doing on But For the Sun, but they've taken it to a different place and a different level, as it's just got a very interesting variety of songs on it. And the songs on these EPs have very smart philosophical lyrics. The relationship stuff is just not here, which I think is a very cool growth from Ian to start writing about some different kinds of ideas and being a little smarter about his lyrics. And I've got more of a summary here because there were 15 songs on this thing collectively. So being rejected in a cruel world, stuff about corporatocracy controlling the world, stuff about rich people in the past and rich artists. I think it kind of talks about musicians here sort of making a bunch of money and selling out in the past to now artists have to bleed for nothing, essentially. War for progress and profit, being in a distracted world and sitting and waiting for your dream to come true when it may not come. Wanting something more out of life besides success and money, being on the grind and just sitting and taking it most days instead of trying something else, being ravaged by politicians' choices for their gain. And then the last one, kind of about escapism, I guess. Needing something worth keeping a memory of or remembering. Message about the powerful will eventually fall. Waiting for another chance at life and missing out on it. Getting left out because you hate other people and others and don't value community. And finally ending with, I can no longer escape all of these problems that basically you just talked about. And that's where we end. This whole set of songs is kind of about, lack of control, other people that are powerful taking advantage of people in the system and disregarding their consequences, wanting to have more out of life except being told what you need, trying to get away from the distraction of the world. And, it's kind of that kind of philosophical idea happening there. And because of that, and because this is creative and sounds really cool, this record is going to go in the top tier also. Hey, we got 2 in a row going in the top tier. Don't hate me for that. But that's how I feel about it after listening to them. So let's go on to Pages now.
I still feel the freeze and burn that was there all summer long. Day by day,
All right, Pages is an EP. It's the first solo EP, basically, that the band released. I know all the 7s technically are, but they were recorded with the intention of being an album. This was not. Stuff is on its own here. So it's the first EP we're looking at, and it's a significant one of their discography, which is why we're looking at it. Got Nick Raskulinecz again producing this one. He's really awesome, of course. This stuff kind of incorporates some kind of synthesized 80s kind of sounds. We got gated percussion sounds and things like that, which is a really cool thing to do in there. It's got kind of some more progressive ideas in it than the previous stuff here, so it's cool, but it's got some strong pop style choruses, very hooky kinds of things. Uses a wide range of guitar sounds and brings more of a hard rock sound, which the previous 7 didn't have quite as much just because of the big variety of styles. It's very well recorded and mixed, just like a Nick Raskulinecz record is going to be. It does have some fairly long songs. It's got 2 pretty long songs on it that I think are both 7 minutes, at least. Yeah. But they're a little bit more interesting than the stuff we got on Ghost and Grey Street, where I had that same gripe. So that's not as big of an issue here. And this sounds like a clear progression as we transition from 7 to the most recent record here. It's kind of in between there and tells you sort of hints at what's coming, maybe. The theme's pretty simple here because it's just 6 songs. But it's, again, more philosophical stuff. You can be yourself. Well, this first song's about a relationship thing, I guess. You can be yourself with the subject of the song. The bigwigs keep saying they need help, like bailout. They, do all these crazy, silly things. But then when stuff gets tough for them, they're like, oh, please help us. Continuing to go in really bad negative cycles because of someone else's manipulation on you or society generally, maybe. Having to let go of somebody to be free. Song basically saying that it's okay to lie as long as you're successful and profiting. That kind of sarcastic message there. And happiness will always be elusive if you don't stay and keep running away too much. So themes, pretty simple stuff here. This is a really good sounding EP. It tells you where the direction the band is going in at that point, and it sounds pretty good. They were really good at blending experimentation with this as well. So it's not quite as interesting as But for the Sun. So it's going to go in the second tier there. So not a bad spot for it. So now we're going to get on to the rest of the story. Okay, the rest of the story, and I may have forgotten to mention with the previous 2 releases that They were technically released in 2023, both of them, even though, 7 was a series that started in 2021. The full release is 2023. All right, the rest of the story, like I said, Nick Raskulinec's once again, this released 2025, continues in a similar direction as Pages, like we talked about, but that makes sense. Last thing was called Pages, and then you get the rest of the story. Pulled back on some of that kind of 80s sound that Pages had, and it's more of hard rock focused thing, like really hard rock. These guys are going for it. With that, it's more similar to 7 in that way, and the bass and drums are featured very prominently, very well. Creative bass from Dave. Sekou being Sekou and doing his Sekou thing. And we love that. Very dynamic vocal style from Ian here. Once again, we got some funky, dirty guitars here, but with a variety of different kind of clean tones here blended in. So we've got the big juxtaposition of really dirty guitar sounds and really clean ones. Has some great lead guitar happening on it, and it's great. It's well written, has really good pacing, really good transitions between sections. This is a very well crafted record here. Sounds really clean. Everything just feels like it's in the place it needs to be. And that's really important with the pacing of a record. And another thing is, it's just a really fun record to listen to. It's got some really, hard rock stuff happening that's really fun with these crazy leads on it. And then it's got some, dialed back stuff, but still has interesting beats, interesting rhythms, interesting vocals. So even the stuff that's not so, hard driving is still good to listen to. All right, let's get into themes here. There's always one more thing you're told you need to have the ideal life, or the thing that you need, whatever kind of thing. Someone pretending that they're a good guy, some goody two shoes, but behind closed doors, they're actually not a saint at all. Believing one thing, and then some new expert comes along and tells you the old experts were lying to you. This is the right thing now. Being afraid of the future because we may not have enough. Being unlucky, so you just run and try to escape from your problems. Someone just wanting to be around in a relationship, but seems kind of to also say that they're not super committed to it. They just want to be around, and that's it. It's like, do you actually believe in anyone if you're going to just keep your head down and grinding for yourself? Talking about the message is like, trying to keep the masses angry and agitated, and then giving them a clear one right to go out and fight for you, kind of, the political manipulation kind of thing there. And if you keep trying to escape, eventually you're just going to be stuck escaping, and you're not really going to have anything to grab onto. Of the seasons and grinding on and wearing you down, and you're just out here waiting for some kind of break to finally get away from the monotony. And then the last song being about someone who comes in to get what they want, and then they just go back out in the world and start doing all these things, start manipulating and kind of trying to make things work out how they want it to. So, this is a fun record to listen to. I'm kind of stuck as to where I want to actually put it, because it's a strong, catchy record. It's not too long. It's actually their shortest record. In terms of, for an LP anyway. Pages is technically their shortest, but it's an EP. So for an LP, this is their shortest one. This was a tough thing to think about, because you've seen what we've got up here already. And based on that, I was considering S at first, or the top tier at first. But the more I think about it, I think it makes more sense to put it in the second tier here with this stuff. Yeah, it's kind of like the ones in the top tier, that's kind of just what at the pinnacle of what they've done. Those are all just really great, well-made, unique sounding records that do a fantastic job of sort of showing you the band's DNA. And then the ones below it do a pretty good job at that as well, but they've just got things that either make them less memorable or less interesting than the ones above them, to where, you're just sure that they're not quite up to that level, but they're still pretty good. And then the rest, this is kind of middling. It's pretty average in terms of the stuff they've already done. You kind of know what's happening with that. And then this is a little bit under there. It's not quite to their potential. You know, they could have done, you know, they could do better, or better is coming. And then the bottom of kind of disappointing, not interesting kind of thing. And there it is. All right, guys, that's going to do it for the Big Wreck Discoglog today. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Like and subscribe if you did. Don't forget to leave a comment down below. You can always tell me what you guys think of these albums here. And don't forget to click the bell so you know when a new video is out on the channel. And I will see you guys next time in another video. Have a good one.